Hey, hello.
Hey,
Can you
can you
hear
hear
us?
me okay?
Yeah.
Hi,
Good.
Tiger.
Hello. Thank you for having
So,
me.
yeah, welcome. Thank you for coming to our show. And first, could you introduce yourself to our viewers?
Sure. So I'm Tiger Cho. I am the founder of Cambridge. I'm a Korean American living in Seoul. I've been here for a little over a year, since September of 2024, and have been building community both here in Seoul, but then have also been hosting some events abroad as well for this Cambridge project that I've been working on.
Okay, thank you. So first, what is K-Bridge?
Mm.
Uh, can you explain more?
Sure. So the origins of Cambridge really started because when I first moved to Seoul in September of last year, I didn't know anybody here.
Mm.
And because I don't speak Korean well, I needed to find a way to meet interesting people, and also to learn about Korean culture. And so I had known that the Korean diaspora was very vast, that there were Korean people living in Australia, in Germany, in the US. And I was coming across a lot of Korean Americans, some Korean Brazilians, some Korean Australians. Many of them had spent time in Korea during their youth. They had gone abroad, and then had come back. And many of those individuals had learned something or had some unique cultural insights about the places that they lived. And I had thought, because the Korean diaspora is so vast, and because there are so many overseas Koreans, but also Korean citizens who spent much time abroad, I wondered if there was a community for these people to meet, to share each other's experiences, and maybe do some professional networking as well. And so that is why I kind of birthed Cambridge, or why it first began. It really started in December of last year when I hosted an in-person event of around 70 to 80 attendees. Um, and every single month since then, I've been hosting events, both here based in Seoul and also a few abroad. So Cambridge exists as a set of these in-person events, but I also do some digital community building as well. So I have a podcast where I will interview Korean heritage individuals from all different parts of the world in many different industries, who have unique stories. And I also have a few like online group chats as well, where these people will share interesting projects that they're working on, or will share new ventures that they're investing in. So that is kind of what Cambridge has become over the last 12 months.
Hmm. Okay. So what is the ultimate goal of K-Bridge? So is it startup or is it just a community? So,
Mm. So originally, I had thought that Cambridge would just be a way for me to build my own personal and professional network while I was here in Seoul. But over time, in terms of the mission and the end goal of Cambridge, ultimately what I've wanted to do is to showcase interesting profiles of people that hadn't spent as much time in Seoul. So even though Cambridge today is a LLC that was incorporated in Chicagoland area, which is where I'm from originally, it is a company, but that is not the primary goal or mission of Cambridge and what I'm building out. I do hope that in the future, as I continue to build Cambridge and have more interesting projects, whether they're events or conferences, or either even startup opportunities within the Cambridge network, that there will be some, for-profit startup related activities that will come up. But it is not, uh, traditionally intended to be a for-profit enterprise. I mostly just wanted to gather as many interesting people as I could, that had these multicultural backgrounds, and to share some of these stories that hadn't been shared before. So it's mostly community building and professional networking, for the community members is the primary objective of Cambridge.
can you explain more about your members? How did you find diaspora or something?
Mm. So I would say, the representation of the members within Cambridge are two large buckets. One are overseas Koreans like myself, who have come back to Seoul or are visiting Seoul regularly for business. So these are typically people who were born abroad, raised abroad, and maybe have some relationship to Korea because of their family or because of their personal interests. That would be probably like 60 to 70% of the people within Cambridge. I would say maybe another 20 to 30% are Korean citizens. They were born in Korea, maybe they were raised in Korea, but they went to school abroad. Or they are building a business that has global ambition. Or maybe they're a Korean person and they moved to San Francisco, they moved to New York City, and they are trying to build a global network in the process. Right? So that is the other major demographic. The last group, which is maybe 5 to 10% of people, are non-Koreans. They're foreigners, and maybe they've been living and working in Korea for a long time, and maybe they're building a very unique business that has some relationship to Korea. Because these people find it sometimes difficult to interact with people that have been living in Korea their whole life, they find the Cambridge community, which is English first, a little bit easier to approach and understand. So those are really the three main groups within Cambridge. And largely, it is people in their like 20s or 30s is probably 70 to 80%. And then maybe 40s and 50s closer to like 20 to 30%.
Interesting. I'd like to double click on what K actually means. So what do you think, what exactly is that K? So is it nationality? Is it ethnicity? Is it like Korean language, culture? Like how do you define K? And what brings people together?
Yes. So initially, the K was mostly anybody that had some Korean ethnic background, right? So because for me, as Korean American, I didn't spend any time in Korea before coming here last year. And so in terms of building a bridge, the initial kind of hope or ambition with building a bridge was to build a bridge across the Korean diaspora because there were so many of these communities. And I think maybe amongst people that are much more professionally established in their 40s and 50s, many Korean Americans or Korean Australians, Korean Germans, they have their own professional networks and are quite interconnected across Korea and Germany or Korea and the States. But among many people that were in their 20s and 30s that were raised abroad, that have Korean heritage, they were not very well connected to people in Korea or to other parts of the world. So the initial intention or the reason why it was called K-Bridge was an attempt to bridge Korean diaspora. Right. But over time, what I had realized is that it is quite hard to create some strict, defined definition of what it means to be K or not K, right? Because then I'd also have people that they spoke Korean fluently, but they're half Korean, right? They're half Korean, they're half French, right? Or they're half Korean, they're half Australian. And so culturally, maybe they had a very good understanding of Korean, right? Maybe more so than somebody like me who had never spent time living in Korea before. And then I had other people who they weren't ethnically Korean at all, but they had spent the vast majority of their professional working life living in Korea, right? So I have slowly started to expand how tight I am, defining K and what it means. And this is why in kind of the description of K-Bridge, I had also included ultimately people who are passionate about the future of Korea. Those are the types of people that, typically will find K-Bridge interesting. So I think that it's important as I build out the identity of the group that it's, the primary kind of demographic that I'm serving is either overseas Koreans or global Koreans. But I do hope that K-Bridge can be useful to foreigners that are looking to engage with Korea in a more meaningful way.
Interesting. I'd like to ask a little bit more about you. So there are many ways we can define our identity. Like it's a sum of parts. Like it could be nationality, it could be gender, like name it. Like there are so many aspects we can see, right? But why did you choose K as the most significant lens to look at identity? So you could build like some other communities, right? So what brought you to like even though you didn't spend that much time in Korea, what made you come back to Korea and what made you to build a community around K?
So, in my youth, I grew up in Chicagoland suburbs, and there were some Korean Americans that lived in the area that I grew up, but I was not very involved with the Korean American community. And so, growing up in middle school and high school at college, the K part of my background or identity it was something that I was always proud of, but it was never something that I kind of owned or promoted, right? And when I was at Stanford, I had done 2 internships in Tokyo, Japan. And those were the first times that I had left the US. And it really opened my eyes to Asia and a whole new way of living and culture. And the reason why I decided to come back to Korea in the first place was because throughout my 20s, I had always thought, wow, Japan was such a unique experience. And when I look back at the time that I spent at Stanford, those 2 summers in Japan stood out as being especially memorable or very formative. And so I had always thought that maybe one day in the future, it would be interesting to spend time in Korea just because of my Korean heritage and just see what it was like, right? And so the reason why I decided to build a community that emphasized the K, this K-Bridge community, was mostly because there was no other community in Korea that I could build aside from an English-speaking community that started to embrace cross-cultural backgrounds, right? Coming to Korea, and because of my lack of Korean language skills, there's a limitation on the types of people I could meet and the types of conversations that I could have. But before coming to Korea, I had become very interested in digital communities and how they can affect the real world. And there was an individual, Balaji Srinivasan, who is running something called the Network School in Singapore. And he has a thesis that in the future, these digital communities that crop up, that basically aggregate these individuals that have overlapping identity and values, they will start to influence the real world in some very meaningful ways. And before coming to Korea, I had known that the Korean diaspora was quite vast, all over the world, and that many people, especially in light of the societal issues that Korea is facing, whether it's aging population or many of the youth that are quite frustrated with like life and culture in Korea, that they had some interest in connecting with other types of people. And so when I came to Korea, I was trying to think about what kinds of communities that I could uniquely build, right? And this is something that I oftentimes think about in my life more generally, which is given my background, my identity, my experiences, what are some things that I could uniquely build? And coming to Seoul, an English-speaking community that was embracing different types of experiences and cultures was one of those things. And so that was really the reason why I decided to embark on this project.
Okay. So I also have a question that, especially in US, there's a lot of active Chinese or Indian or Israeli communities. When you see them, what is the major difference between Korean community and compared to them?
It was interesting because I guess my observation of some Korean communities in the US, especially when I was in undergrad. So when I was at university, for example, there were 2 different types of Korean communities, right? There's a Korean American community, and then there's Korean international community. And this also relates to one of my passions for Cambridge is generally these 2 groups are quite segregated, right? The Korean backgrounds, they tend to congregate amongst themselves. And the Korean Americans, they tend to congregate amongst themselves as well, right? And for me, as somebody who didn't grow up, spend any time in Korea, but also didn't grow up in Korean American community, I didn't feel like I could easily fit into either of these groups. right? And in starting Cambridge, I noticed the same things coming up time and time again, where there were some Korean groups. They spoke English well. They had some shared experience. Same thing with Korean Americans who maybe just moved to Seoul recently. And I think one of the observations that I've had is that there are both pros and cons to having very strong group identity, right? And I think Korean people in general, they're very good at developing strong, very deep group identity dynamics. But maybe the downside of that is oftentimes there is not as much cross collaboration amongst different groups within Korean diaspora communities. So that was something that I had noticed, and part of my hope with Cambridge was that there would be more cross-cultural discussion. Language creates one barrier that's hard to overcome, but I hosted an event actually at Stanford in San Francisco earlier this year. And one of the things I was really pleased about was the types of representation that I had in terms of background, because there were some people that had, only been living in the States for a year or 2 years working on a startup. And they had spent their whole lives living in Korea. And then I had some other Korean Americans who were maybe interested in going back to Korea or just becoming more connected to their Korean heritage. And both of these kind of groups were having discussion and exchanging experiences and ideas. And that was really one of my hopes with Cambridge. But this is something that I've noticed about Korean diaspora communities in general, is that they're, because people are so, I would say, loyal, or group dynamics are very strong, there's also sometimes a downside where there's not as much, dynamic collaboration.
Interesting. So, besides from just gathering those people in one community, like both on digital and on offline, what other efforts you're trying to what other efforts are trying to boost collaboration among these people?
I would say that in terms of collaboration, one of it is trying to identify some organizations that are also passionate about the same ideas, right? So I hosted an event in New York City earlier this year, and it was in collaboration with an organization called the Korea Society. And the Korea Society's kind of stated mission is to facilitate collaboration and cooperation between US and Korea. Right? Because I am really just one person trying to share these stories and host these events in Seoul, there's kind of a limit on how much I can do to provide connections and to facilitate this collaboration. But by partnering with specific individuals that are also passionate about this, or specific organizations like the Korea Society, this becomes much more possible. So in some ways, I look at myself as kind of a facilitator or a connector, where maybe I'm not doing all of the work, but that I'm bringing two different parties, two different organizations together. And I'll give one more example, which is earlier in my Cambridge journey, I came across an individual of Korean German background. And he has a very large network in Seoul of Korean Germans. And in late October, this month, we are going to be hosting a collaboration of events with a few Korean German individuals, some of whom are in the venture startup scene. And we're going to be showcasing kind of their community and how there's very interesting cross-cultural collaboration opportunities between Berlin and Seoul that are actively growing. And so showcasing some individuals like this is one way where I hope I can continue to facilitate this cross collaboration, because there are already many, like I would say, captains of specific Korean diaspora communities that are based here in Seoul. People of Korean American background, people of Korean Australian background. It's just a matter of trying to bring these people together. That's really where I see my role and the role of Cambridge.
So as you know, we are also building our own media and community, so we should
we should collaborate more.
Collaborate.
I'd love to, yes. And I think this is kind of why I was very interested in even coming on and having this discussion, is I couldn't find that many I would say organic, experimental types of like podcasts or people just looking to try and host new events in Korea. Maybe they existed, and because of my lack of Korean language, I couldn't find them. But when I was asking people around, especially overseas Korean backgrounds, I didn't find that many of them. And so that's why it's always very exciting for me to find people here in Korea that are looking to collaborate or partner on these projects.
Yeah, that's good.